Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. We're thrilled to share with you that the new NARM book will be available on audiobook on November 8th, 2022. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma, using the NeuroAffective Relational Model to address adverse childhood experiences and resolve complex trauma audiobook will be read by the authors, our very own NARM creator, Dr. Lawrence Heller, and senior trainer, Brad Kammer. This book is designed to promote personal and collective change. The intention is to make NARM accessible for anyone working or dealing with complex trauma. Using therapeutic examples and helpful exercises, Brad and Larry demonstrate how NARM can serve as a catalyst to promote healing and post-traumatic growth. Whether you are a mental health or other helping professional, or simply interested in personal growth, we hope you will find this book useful in your professional work and personal healing. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma book is now available on Amazon and other online book retailers, and the audiobook will be available to order November 8th on Audible and other audiobook services. Please visit www.narmtraining.com/books to stay up to date on the latest news. And now for our interview. Sabino Recovery, located in Tucson, Arizona, is a residential trauma treatment program designed to address every aspect of trauma, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addictions that have stemmed from unresolved trauma. They offer individualized services that provide physical, mental, and emotional support. Joining us today are three members of the Sabino Recovery multidisciplinary team, including Shara Turner, Robin Green, and Robin Miller. Shara, an equine therapist and Sabino Recovery's clinical director, brings a unique perspective and skill set to this work. Robin Green is a lead primary therapist who works closely with the residents, and Robin Miller works on-site with their families and loved ones. We hope you enjoy this conversation with the Sabino Recovery team. Welcome to the podcast, Sabino Recovery team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. And I'm sitting here with Shara Turner, Robin Green, and Robin Miller. And I'm just so delighted to have this time together with all of you to talk about the work that you're doing there at Sabino Recovery. So if it's okay, I'd love to start by asking you the question that we open NARM sessions with. And that is, what is it that you'd like listeners to get out of our time together today? And Shara, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with me. I think one of the biggest things is that the work that we're doing at Sabino Recovery, and that true trauma treatment really does exist out there in the world of recovery. The way that we see people, not through a lens of what's wrong with them, or it's really through what happened to them. And that's how we base all of our work and all of our programming, on that basic concept, what's underlying all of those maladaptive coping mechanisms. So just getting that word out, and also just sharing how inspired myself and my team have been through this training of NARM. It's been really profound for us.
Great. Thank you. And Robin G.
Hi. I think for me today, really what I wanted to share is more about obviously the NARM training and how we're applying it at Sabino, and just the beautiful work that has come out of that in session. And in addition to that, how going through the training, how it's affected myself, both personally and professionally.
Oh, great. I love that. Yeah, the personal piece. I don't know about you, but that wasn't something I expected. I thought I'd show up to a training, get my CEUs and move on my way, but there's a lot there personally. All right, Robin Miller.
I am so excited to be here today and just to share the work that we are doing here at Sabino Recovery. It's so incredibly powerful to see lives changed, and not just individual lives, but families as well, and to share how we are integrating NARM into our both individual and family work that we're doing. And I echo what Shara and Robin have said of just how profound it's been for me, both professionally and personally.
So if you could tell us more about the work that you're doing there at Sabino.
Yeah, so Sabino Recovery is obviously in Tucson, Arizona. We've been here for about 6 years now. And really everything we do is through a lens of trauma. One of my favorite stories to tell is I had a gentleman come through sat down at my desk and tells me I have no trauma. I just drink too much. Help me figure out why I drink too much, and come to find out he was horribly bullied in the 5th grade. I've had so many parents of potential residents call and say, well, my child had a perfect life. Like, I don't know what's wrong with them. Why do they keep doing the same thing over? Yeah, maybe they were bullied in grade school, or maybe they were, isolated a little bit, but they should be fine. And not understanding the impact that developmental trauma has, and that trauma is not defined one way. It's different for everyone. And events dysregulate the nervous system differently for different people. We really, here at Sabino, look at the entire person through a holistic, integrative, individualized way. And for me, coming from public health and then going to some of the bigger treatment facilities before I came to Sabino, it works. We really see success in what we're providing when we see that person as an individual and allow them some agency over their process.
Already threading in the agency piece, right? I love it. And how about the other two of you?
Similar to what Shara said, I see sometimes when people come in here, when we begin to talk about trauma, I think that they are looking at themselves and looking at this broad term of trauma as like a really huge, impactful thing. And I think that there are times when they look at it through the scope of just, shock trauma, and they don't really consider like all those developmental pieces, the family of origin. And so that's what I try to bring in session, is to really look at, some of the patterns in your life and how you're bringing that to your life as a whole, and where did those patterns begin. And just, one of the things that sometimes happens at Sabino, there's a comparison game, like, I'm not worthy of being here. My trauma's not as big. And so it's not a competition for sure. And we just look at trauma as more generational trauma, developmental, and just how their healing unfolds when they recognize that they can have responsibility over the way that they heal. And I think that once they begin to look at themselves in just a different lens with more compassion, that's when I think the true magic really happens. Just allowing themselves to be cared for in the way that they need it most. And that's really kind of what we do here, is just really allowing them to essentially fall apart and be safe while they're doing it, and be heard and be held. And that's really beautiful to watch.
Thank you.
I think in addition to what these ladies have said, I will just add that I think what sets Sabino apart is our emphasis on trauma. I hear from residents and family members that maybe this isn't their first rehab, so to speak, and maybe it's their 3rd or 4th time in rehab. And even family members that come for family programs say, you guys are doing it different. You're focusing on the underlying reasons for the maladaptive coping. And we really stress that maladaptive coping is bigger than just substances, that we all have those maladaptive coping strategies that we use, and we come by them naturally because it's what helped us survive. And we do come at it from a place of compassion that, yes, it makes sense why you have those maladaptive coping and it's no longer serving you. So what can we do different moving forward? And what is it that you most want for yourselves moving forward, individually and as family members?
Yeah, I got to just add in one more thing. One of the most beautiful things someone ever said to me was, I left my shame at Sabino. Well, every time I hear it and say it out loud, it just gives me chills, because that's what we do. We allow people to leave their shame here, and we love them through their struggles. I'm very proud to be a part of this team.
That is so powerful. I got chills too when you said that. I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. So all of you talked a little bit about it, but I'm curious how you're holding complex trauma, how at Sabino, like, how would you define it? I heard you talk kind of about the big T, little t, like shock trauma. And then how are we holding complex trauma?
We actually talked a little bit about this, obviously, before on the 3 of us. And really, to me, complex trauma is synonymous with developmental trauma. Things that happen, in childhood, those environmental, cultural, societal failures that just compile on top of one another and drive this narrative of unsafety and unworthiness throughout adulthood. I guess complex compilation of traumas, and how we're defining trauma. Again, it's not the divorce, destruction, death, violence. Yes, those are traumatic. Don't get me wrong, but it's also the child that was never seen and never heard, or the child that had to pick up the pieces for a mentally ill parent. Maybe on the outside, they looked like they had a good life, but in the inside, they became an adult at 3 or 4 years of age because they had to pick up the pieces. So things of that nature that are just now, in the last however many years, are coming to light as true traumatic events that are affecting how we show up every day.
Mm-hmm. And you're naming something that feels so important, because I think it's so common, this piece of like a client in front of us can be totally functional or high functioning, but inside there's kind of this crumbling nature, right? Yeah, and I'm seeing your heads nods. I imagine that's something you see. You probably see a decent amount of. Or Robin, do either of you have any thoughts?
More of what Shara said, but it's really like I tend to look at how they're relating to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're connecting to themselves, if they're disconnecting from themselves, like that was, to me, something that they've had to learn, something that they've had to adapt to. And connecting to yourself can be really scary, especially if they weren't allowed to do that in the home or to share any feelings, and when they come into this kind of environment, we're, talking about feelings and connecting to yourself. And so really having them learn how to do that is something that I'm pretty proud of, that we definitely promote here. So I view, CPTSD or complex PTSD as how we relate to ourselves, but also like how we were taught to relate to ourselves as children too, and how that's maybe gotten us to where we are as adults.
When I think of complex trauma, I think layers. It's not the shock trauma, the one event that happens that, everybody rallies around and supports you through. It's the trauma upon little trauma, upon big trauma that never gets dealt with, never gets resolved, is stored, within us. It's how, as Robin said, how we start relating to ourselves and viewing ourselves through this lens of deficiency. What is wrong with me? Why do these things keep happening to me? I must be undeserving for all of these bad things to keep happening.
Yeah. In this moment, I'm noticing I'm just feeling really curious about each of you individually, because you clearly all have a different background, but I wondered if we could hear from you each about what led you to work with complex trauma and to be in this field.
Well, for me, I'm a trauma survivor. So I grew up in a pretty traumatic household, but always kind of thought, oh, just get over it. Like it's just something that happens, just get over it. And then when it manifested into an anxiety disorder in my 20s, it was like, well, I guess I'm not getting over this. And as well, I had my first husband passed away of alcoholism. So that was a very big event for me in my life. And to watch him go in and out of rehab and really want to get sober and want to get better, but addressing his diagnosis of alcohol use disorder from one lens, and that is a medical model, or, again, what's wrong with you? Let's just, throw some psychoeducation material at you and put you on meds and send you home. Like everything's going to be fine. Why do you keep relapsing? The shame of the relapse. And back then I didn't understand what trauma work was. And so going through that and realizing that his life could have been different had he have done this deeper work really drove me into this field of trauma work. And then just finding NARM has aligned so much with my belief system. It's been a beautiful thing.
Thank you for that.
Well, for me, I think my own trauma has definitely gotten me into wanting to help others, through their own difficulties and their own trauma. It wasn't something that I was really searching for, but it's what led me to where I am today, doing therapy with people. And there always seemed to be just kind of a missing piece. But, through my own work, I'm definitely trauma survivor. There was a lot of things going on in my life, and I felt as though growing up, there wasn't a lot of room for my feelings. And so I'm having these big feelings, needing to stuff them down. And so ultimately, it just kind of, that connection disconnection piece really hits home for me when looking at NARM. And so, I definitely worked at different agencies where trauma was kind of brushed to the side, but then coming to Sabino, it was more of a focus, and I love that. And NARM, it just fits. It's like that missing piece that is what's needed out there. I want, as many people to embrace this model, because I think that there's so much change that can come from it, just the way you relate to yourself and My big thing is giving yourself permission to feel all the feelings and not shaming yourself for those feelings and not feeling, different because you're having these really difficult feelings.
Mm.
So for me, I won't name how many years ago, but let's say decades ago, I took a psychology class as a high school senior, and it was life-changing for me. And it set me on the path that took many years to kind of circle back around to. One of the beautiful things is I'm still in touch with that high school teacher today and have let him know what an influence he was on my life. And so I knew that I wanted to be in counseling and for that to be part of my life work. And like I said, it took many years to circle back around when I had opportunity to do my internship and was able to connect with Sabino. I just knew there was something different about the work that they were doing here, and looking at my own life journey of the challenges and traumas that I experienced more as an adult, difficult marriage, kids that have struggled, those kinds of things, to really find that I could bring my healing and experience into people's lives that I'm working with, and to just, again, believe in the mission of what we do, that their healing is possible. And we've got a great platform, and NARM has just enhanced that platform for us to be able to do that work.
Thank you, each of you, for sharing that. That's the personal side of this work, right? And that's one of the things I love about NARM that I kind of heard in all of your stories is that we can bring ourselves to this work, that we're not supposed to be a blank slate necessarily, that we have something to offer with our own personal experiences. So thank you each for sharing those. So I wondered if one of you could share, how you came into NARM, like how did you find NARM? What led you to be trained in NARM? I'd love to hear that. I imagine one of you kind of brought the whole of you, but I don't know that. Maybe not. Tell me what happened.
So actually, one of our outreach reps, because we have people that work in different parts of the country, and brought it to my attention. Said, "Hey, have you ever thought about NARM?" And I was like, "What is that?" I've never heard of it. He goes, "You got to look it up." He said, I was talking to a potential resident a while back, and they asked if we had any NARM therapist. And, when I started doing my research, I realized this is a thing. This is something that's really up and coming. So I went and I did the research, and I went to my CEO and I said, "We got to do this." And so Robin G is our lead therapist and Robin M is our lead family therapist. And I thought that, there's no better combination here than the three of us to come in. I can bring it to my supervision because I do a lot of supervision here as clinical director. They can bring it into their practice. And so it's been a great way to integrate. That's really how it came to fruition.
I love it.
Yeah.
So you did some research and you were like, this is a thing.
This is a thing. I got to do this. I got to find out what this thing is because it sounds amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so each of you have a different role. Shara, you're as the clinical director, and then we've got, what are the other two roles? The family therapy?
Yes.
Tell me the two different roles.
Go ahead. You guys can tell them what you do.
Yeah, tell us what you do.
Okay. I'm the lead therapist here. I'm the lead clinical therapist. Yeah, I look after, hopefully try to help Shara out by helping out the clinical team.
Cool. Is there anything from NARM that you're seeing yourself already bring into your work?
Oh, yes. So we finished our training this month. It was 9-month long. It was beautiful and eye-opening as well. But overall, really, it's just this sense of agency that I don't think a lot of our clientele have really been able to interact with, so just this idea of being able to take responsibility for your healing, being able to have choice, and even the therapy sessions. So I think one of the biggest things is just that question, what do you want from our time together today? And just that question, they're just kind of blown away. I've never been given the choice. It's usually the therapist with the agenda, and that's not how it works. And even in just asking that question, just how beautiful of a moment that can provide the people that we work with. And everything is so relational in NARM. There's so many layers to it. And so just even with that question, you're just building that relationship as well. And then the idea of just how you from there structuralize the session to really feel held and listened to and curious about their life. So I think that's really how I've brought it to my sessions, and just the general curiosity and also the 50-50 is really big for me too.
Yes.
Yes.
The 50-50 is big. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm the lead family therapist, and so I meet with half of our residents individually each week to talk about kind of all things relationships and family related. And a lot of times I will ask them if they're considering family program, what would you like to get for yourself from family program? And then that gives me a really big window into some of the family dynamics and asking, well, what would be on the other side of that if we were able to accomplish that? And so that's been very powerful. And then each week we conduct a family program. We try to do it around a residence when they're about 3/4 of the way done with their stay, and invite, some of the key family members in to participate in our family program. And so I'm facilitating a large part of that. And it's been neat to incorporate some of the NARM ideas into even family program, just recognizing there's opportunity for psychoeducation. Again, I think I mentioned earlier, helping people recognize their strategies and that they've served a purpose, and also just allowing for consent, rather than, I use a lot of invite quite a bit. I invite you to do this, or we invite you to consider this, checking in rather than just assuming that because I'm a therapist, I can offer feedback, asking permission to give feedback, using the arriving exercise of just, helping residents and their family members kind of settle in maybe when they're coming back from a lunch break, or, to be able to kind of transition slowly into that group experience. And I haven't educated on the 50-50 yet, try to encourage them to kind of hold that balance between what's happening for them individually as well as how they are relating to the group. And it's been a much nicer transition than just everybody piling back in and, okay, we're back into programming, and to really recognize and give people opportunity to get in touch with themselves and be able to connect with the group as well.
I'm just feeling so much gratitude in my heart right now as I think about all the families that you're working with and that you're really touching lives. I imagine the secondary change is it's quite a different experience, I imagine, as you're kind of sharing how you even just help them transition in from a lunch break, how much that can just help folks settle in a little bit and take in the experience a little deeper, and how the ripple effects of that going forward. How beautiful that is.
It really is beautiful. Yes.
Yeah.
And, I just wanted to add in, talking about incorporating NARM. As a clinical director, I don't do a lot of individual work, although I'm an equine therapist and I do brain spotting. I have noticed myself bringing those concepts even into those other modalities, right? So when you start out a brain spotting session with what do you want to get out of this today rather than what do you want to work on? It's just a shift that really changes the energy in the room. Same with equine. Horses are such grounding, magical, amazing creatures anyway, but then really, really focusing on that 50-50 balance and what's happening internally while they're interacting with the horse has made a huge shift in just my work in those two modalities. So
I love that. Thank you. Well, I wondered in these last few minutes that we have, if any of you could share, any stories of struggle or anything that you've been inspired by clients. I wonder, what you might have to share in that way with us.
I'll share. Through, learning NARM, there was a particular person I was working with who, enormous traumas since childhood, and that carried through as an adult, just how they would respond to these traumas, which ultimately led this person to being chronically suicidal. And, you know, as a society, suicide is scary to talk about, scary to look at. And through, my work in NARM and through my work with this person, I brought this question to Brad, like, how do we work with people who are, chronically suicidal? And, Brad didn't skip a beat. He just said, ask them what's on the other side of that for them. Like, so what's on the other side of, right? I know. What's on the other side of this suicidal gesture for you? And I brought that back in a session, and that truly changed the way that we moved forward in session. And it was identified by this person that they were just feeling so much weight from their trauma, and they just wanted to get away from the daily feelings and the responsibilities of all these feelings that, came along with it. And so we were really able to take that piece and do some really great healing. And they were able to move through to a point where by the time that they left, they weren't having those suicidal ideations anymore. And it's carried through even when they've gotten home, and they've been gone from our facility for, I would say, about 6 months, maybe a little bit longer now. And still they're doing well. But just to frame something, like being suicidal in that kind of model, and just looking at like, what would you get from it if you were to actually move forward with, that suicidal gesture? Like, what would that bring for you? So it was scary to dive into, but what an amazing moment.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I was recently working with a resident, and it was our initial session. So getting to know this person, and as they were recounting what brought them to treatment, it was so much about hurt that they had caused in their marriage, and that their spouse didn't seem able to forgive them and to move on. And that, they didn't feel like there was much hope if their spouse couldn't forgive them for the wrongs that had occurred. And I just stopped for a moment and I said, may I ask you a question? And they said, yes. And I said, have you forgiven yourself? And they just wept and they said, no. And they had talked about how they just feel kind of emotionally beat up by their spouse and the unforgiveness. And I was just able to help them see the correlation of your spouse is beating up on you emotionally, and you also are beating yourself up emotionally. And you could just literally see the light bulb come on in their face and their countenance change to realize, this is how I'm showing up for myself, and this is what I'm doing to myself. And a couple of days later, I saw that same individual and they're like, I'm working on it. And you could just even again see the shift in their countenance of being so much more at peace, and saying, I'm not there yet, but I'm working on that forgiveness piece of myself, and that's going to be a game changer for me. So that was just really encouraging and very powerful to, again, just slow things down, help the residents see how they're disconnecting from themselves and how to get back to connection with themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. This morning, I had an equine session with the whole group, because we do group equine on Mondays and Fridays. And they had a task to get the horse through this path without a bridle or without bribing or anything like that. And so the minute that the task became transactional and goal oriented, the horse just sat there, just stuck. And they were pushing and pulling. Of course, no one got hurt ever, but just got a little stick out and prodding on the ground, and the horse just sat there. And then they backed off, they took a deep breath, they reconnected to each other as a community, and the horse walked through the path. And I just think it's so indicative of people, right? When they don't have agency. And I mean, so many beautiful things came out of NARM for me, but the most beautiful thing was children that have no agency over their life. As they get older, of course, they're going to want to have that. So they've got that little rebel inside. When you tell them what to do or you impose your beliefs or your lens on them, they're going to get stuck. And then we wonder why people are stuck. And then we blame them for being stuck. Right? And yet when we just stop and we breathe and we connect and we allow them to find their own truth and see ourselves as just, we're facilitating the journey. We're not dictating it. We're just facilitating it. It is such a huge, beautiful shift. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that moment.
Yeah.
As we're kind of wrapping up here, I'm wondering if there's anything specific that you've learned in your process, either personal or professional, around complex trauma that's really been helpful that you would like others to know.
Well, I think for me, just going back to exactly what we were talking about, that agency piece, and also the way we attack ourselves. Children not being able to look at their primary caregivers as being the ones that were doing them wrong. They had to look at themselves as being wrong. And we will continue to attack ourselves throughout life, but allowing for a space that diminishes the shame and the brokenness that we believe we are. That's, to me, is just key. And that's not just in NARM, that's not in Sabino. I mean, that's just in general. We have to allow the space to let go of the shame and realize that everything we're doing is just playing out a survival strategy that we learned. And we just have to learn how to do it a little different.
There's so much hope in that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I definitely have noticed within myself is just, I said it before, but just the permission to feel and to not, judge myself for being too sensitive or all that stuff. And actually, that's an asset in this field. And, something was said in the training about not showing up as an expert. And I think that's so true, that I think that if most therapists adopt that framework of just kind of walking alongside someone in their struggle and genuinely being curious and open-hearted, that can really lend itself to more beautiful change more than anything. I think a lot of the people that I've definitely worked with, some of the feedback I hear initially is, well, you're the expert and you tell me what I need to do. And in those moments, I just say, I'm not the expert. Like, you are the expert at your life. I'm just here witnessing it with you and walking alongside you in this time. So that's how I want to continue to show up with the people I work with. And then, with myself, just allowing myself to be able to have that permission to feel all the feelings without judgment.
I think one of the biggest impacts this training has had for me is this whole idea of the 50-50, because I feel like my training, my schooling taught me to be focused on the client. And, I would probably say I was 100% client, zero Robin. And to just realize that, no, I've got stuff going on inside of me, even when I'm present and engaged in the session, and to recognize that, honor that, not try to squelch it, get curious about it. And then to also be able to, take that into my supervision of how I'm relating to a particular person and how something similar might be showing up in my life in a different way. And to know if I'm asking that resident to feel into their feelings and inviting them on that journey, that I need to be offering that to myself as well. So it's been very, very empowering to just help me connect back with myself.
Yeah. And what I really heard in that is that piece of modeling, that when we're connected to ourselves, we're modeling that for who's in front of us. How beautiful that is. Oh, thank all three of you. I just really have enjoyed this conversation and I'm learning so much. And I wondered if you could share with listeners how they can get in touch with the work that you're doing. We'll have things in the show notes, I'm sure, but could you share how they can find you?
Yeah, I would welcome anyone. It's sabinorecovery.com to take a look at our website. It's pretty extensive and talks about, everything that we do here and everything that we treat. And there's a phone number at the top that, they can call and speak to an admissions coordinator at any time. And even if Sabino's not the right fit, we can always direct them where we feel might be. We vet a lot of resources. We work with a lot of different residential facilities because we know that there's not one size fits all, but we're always willing to help people out finding the right fit for them in their journey going forward. So.
That's great. That's great to know. So folks can reach out to you even if they know your site is not going to be a place they can go. Maybe they're far, far away from Arizona, but you can help them find the resources that they need.
Yes, of course. Yeah, always.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all three of you and look forward to, watching the work that you're doing and hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The practical guide for healing developmental trauma using the NeuroAffective Relational Model to address adverse childhood experiences and resolve complex trauma audiobook will be available on November 8th, 2022. This book is designed to promote personal and collective change. The intention is to make NARM accessible for anyone working or dealing with complex trauma. Whether you are a mental health or other helping professional, or simply interested in personal growth, we hope you will find this book useful in your professional work and personal healing. The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma book is now available on Amazon and other online book retailers, and the audiobook will be available to order November 8th on Audible and other audiobook services. please visit www.narmtraining.com/books to stay up to date on the latest news. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.